Welcome to Conscious Conversations, a place where East meets West, a place where conversations and ideas will challenge your minds, expand your consciousness, awaken your heart, and make you think more deeply about yourself and the world.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Conscious Conversations. I'm Anthony Profeta, back here with Wes Gordon. How are you doing today, Wes?
Doing very well.
Good.
Very well.
Always good to see you and converse with you. And today was actually a topic that you sort of brought up to our attention that you thought maybe we would have a little conversation on. And for those of you that are watching and listening and are here today, we're going to talk a little bit about how God sees the world. But now, of course, we're not being so presumptuous as to say we actually know the way he is seeing it, or not he, but God is seeing it. And so, but we do want to talk about some spiritual truths that align with this sort of idea. And, you know, there are many actually different philosophies out there that say, you know, it's seen in many different ways. If we take Hermetics, they say that the world is actually contained in like the mind of God. Mm-hmm. If we take even some of the Eastern philosophies, they say that this is like a dream of God, or in Hinduism, they say it's like a play, Leela, they call it, and it's a divine play that we're in. Some say, you know, that if they don't even believe that at all, they say that this world is actually very real. You know, if they're from this materialistic sort of perspective, they say matter is all that is, and, you know, who knows if there is anything else beyond that. But what is your whole idea of this way of spiritual understanding of what's happening around us and where we find ourselves and all of that?
Well, you know, keep doing the meditation and you keep studying and reading, things start popping up and you start asking more questions within yourself, like, how does God see the world? And then you look around you and you see people complaining and saying it doesn't seem like God's doing anything around here. Right. You know, the world's in chaos and there's good people having bad things and all that.
Yeah.
So I start going deeper and I'm like, well, you know, when Christ came along, he confused the whole setup because he said, my kingdom is not of this world.
Right.
You know, and it's like, well, what world is he referencing? And then when you drop back in the scriptures, you see, well, what is God? And it says God is a spirit. Well, a spirit's invisible.
Right.
So we've got this gentleman coming along that can do all these miracles, is talking about an invisible, delusional kingdom that we can't see or touch or apparently feel at that point of our level of awareness. So you would think, well, this guy's kind of crazy, but then you see his demonstration.
And some people did call him crazy and said he's out of his mind, and that possessed by a demon. And
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then, but yet his life expression was showing that he knew some truth that others didn't know. And they're still fighting it tooth and nail to disprove it till this day. Right. After what, how many years? I mean, that's pretty impactful. And then I drop back to the Garden of Eden.
Right.
And I see Adam and Eve walking around with no clothes on. You know, and I can only think of that in a humanistic level, unless I raise my consciousness. But in their mind, or in their my perception of them is that was normal, and there wasn't anything distasteful about it whatsoever, because there was no impurities in their thinking or heart or energy at all.
Right.
So it was totally okay. And then all of a sudden, they took part of some fruit, and their consciousness level, from what I'm understanding, dropped.
Right.
And now all of a sudden they say, well, I'm naked.
Yeah.
And that's when the Lord asked them, well, who told you you were naked?
Right.
So what happened, in my opinion, is they fell from a level of heavenly consciousness into what we call materiality,
right?
Or physicality.
And duality. Yes.
They believed in two powers,
right
and wrong, tree of knowledge of good and evil.
Right.
Whereas before that, they understood the true and one only power was God. Everything in their presence in that surrounding was God.
Yes. And we sort of, we did touch upon this when we were talking about the Garden of Eden, and how there are certain traditions that do believe that's exactly what was happening, that, you know, they were in a state of God consciousness, spiritual consciousness, which saw like oneness, didn't understand things in terms of duality yet, and then their level of consciousness fell, so that there was this, you know, belief now in us and them, or them and God and everything, and it was like they became self-aware, that, you know, the seeing themselves as naked opened themselves up to their selfish or self-aware consciousness, which saw them as separate from other things, which is an interesting sort of perspective on how duality consciousness did arise.
Exactly.
But you know, even in terms of the, you know, this idea that we're living in this world, do you see it from the perspective of it being real?
It's temporal,
Right.
and I'm discovering for myself that anything eternal is spiritual
Okay.
and would therefore be invisible to the human vision.
Right.
But I'm also understanding that God is so pure that our level of perception doesn't even enter his orbit.
Okay. Right.
See, we're all thinking we've turned God into a human form of a God, and we think he sees our everyday everything.
Yeah.
It's not even in his realm.
No.
If you're not walking in grace, if you're still under the law, which my mentor calls it cosmic law,
Okay.
which is reap what you sow.
Right. Which
You're
is a
not-
level of consciousness.
Yes, you're in a consciousness level where that grace doesn't touch you.
Right.
So you're left to your own demise. You know, you're going to suffer from whatever comes along. You're going to have to try to figure it out on your own. Whereas the bigger plan was you didn't have to. You know, all I have is thine. Step under the principles, laws, and truths of your Father and have this energy envelop you, and your life takes on a different essence, a different.
Absolutely.
But we don't believe that.
No. And what you're talking about right now actually is very in line and in tune with Eastern traditions, especially the Hindu perspective of us, and the Buddhists also believe this as well, though, that we're living in this veil of Maya, or illusion and delusion, that we're not seeing reality clearly as it really is because of our level of consciousness. And when you just said that, you know, God, it doesn't like see, or that level of consciousness like isn't within God, they actually believe the exact same thing. They believe that delusion and illusion, while everything comes from God, it is not God, and it does not affect God. So God itself is not deluded by duality. It only understands that everything is in that one power, and from that one power, everything arose from it. In terms of the Hindu tradition also, this idea that in the beginning, in some of their sort of, I guess you could say, creation myths or stories, they say that in the beginning was Brahman, which is their term for the formless manifestation of the power of God. It has no form. It's like this formless consciousness or energy, if you want to call it that. And when it was there in the beginning, it was infinite bliss, love. It was just pure being. It was a self-aware, loving energy, but also way beyond even the way I'm describing it right now, because
total connectedness.
Right, and you know, my description of it is limiting it, but it's even beyond that. But what it says is that it was filled with so much love that it wanted to share its love with others. So the one became many. And that's how, through the Hindu terminology, they get all the different souls that are now sort of living in this world and in existence right now. The one Brahman sort of became many in itself. And then it wanted to share its love with all, and wanted all to understand its love.
Right.
However, some of those souls began to seek love or follow love for things other than love of Brahman. And so it began to search love of power, love of money, love of fame, whatever it might be. It began to use love in a selfish sort of way.
Right.
And when it did that, that's when sort of the whole falling into delusion and Maya sort of came about, was through this sort of selfish projection of moving through a different direction with love. And only once it turns back to trying to seek the love of Brahman, and it knows that love, like it's in the back of its head, it knows it's longing for that, but it's trying to look for it in all these things out there, which is illusionary, not a real sort of thing. Once it begins to turn back, and once it does attain God consciousness, that's when that duality falls apart. And then it's no longer there. You've become one with Brahman, and you attain that spiritual level of consciousness, which sees the world in a very different way.
Right. Right, you're working back to your birthright, your natural birthright,
Right.
as a son or daughter of God,
Yeah.
and that channel's within you. Your job is to realize it. But yeah, so technically, God doesn't see the world that you're in when you're not living underneath His principles, laws, and truths.
I love that you said this. I think we have to take a quick break here, but don't forget that, because I want to come back after these messages and continue with that point. So stay tuned, and we'll be talking more about how God sees the world as soon as we return. Thank you. Welcome back to Conscious Conversations. We're here talking today about how God sees the world. And before we went to break, you brought up an excellent point, Wes. So do you remember exactly what you said? Because that triggered something in me.
Yeah, I was saying that God doesn't actually see our level of awareness or consciousness.
Yes.
And He's not in this unless you're under His grace or you're obeying His spiritual laws and truths working through you. You're not under that covering, so you're left to your own demise.
And what this triggered in me was something, again, going back to the Eastern traditions, which I know you're not really aware of. Like, you were studying more
Right.
of the, mystical sort of Western Christian aspect, but it aligns perfectly, again, with this idea from the Vedanta philosophy of Hinduism.
Really?
Yes, in which they say that God, this world that we live in is a play, a Leela, but it's more like it's a cosmic play that's God's dream. And the way we interpret the world is we're now enrolled in these parts, and the way we see the world is in relationship to, if you want to think about the theory of relativity, that, everything is in relation to the observer. So we're seeing the world through observing it through our physical dimensional eyes in this world that we're in. And so this whole idea of life and death, health and sickness, all of that is only at our level.
Yeah.
It's not at the higher spiritual level of the God level. That doesn't exist in His realm. It's illusionary according to the idea of the Vedanta philosophy that this world is God's dream. And have you ever had a dream before that just felt so real to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's what they say we're locked in right now. Yeah. We're locked in this dream of this divine dream, which is filled with, and again, it's considered play because it's filled with tragedy, it's filled with action, it's filled with comedy, it's filled with all these aspects of a play. But we're become so engrossed in playing this part that we've become forgetful of our true nature. Right. We've become forgetful of the true reality of what life really is. And we're only seeing it from the level of this actor in the play, but that's not the way that God actually sees reality.
Exactly. And unfortunately, the way that the religions have adapted to this message, they've turned a man God into something that's supposedly punishing you and torturing you. And that's never been the truth ever. That's not ever been happening. You are in a level of duality and living in temporality or limitation, cause and effect, reap what you sow. So your own actions and the way that you're viewing your perception of this world, this level of awareness, comes with it its own sufferings.
Right.
I mean, like when he said they had to leave the garden, he said, hey, it's not going to be easy peasy anymore. You're going to have to get everything by the sweat of your brow. It wasn't like he was saying, hey, I don't love you anymore and you're going to have to suffer. He's saying you left this level of awareness, and now because you think you know everything in this duality level of awareness, it's going to be a struggle to actually put food in your mouth and to survive.
Right.
Not that I'm up here going, I'm punishing you because you left my great forest or my great garden. That's not the situation whatsoever.
No, in fact, if you really get to the teachings of the higher spiritual wisdom figures of Jesus and Christian and all of these, it's that God is always wanting us to come back. It's not like, here it is to punish you. I want you separated from me. I don't even want to look at you. It's like, well, wait, I'm waiting for you to return.
Right.
Come back to me. And it's like He's constantly calling us back also through sending, prophets or messengers or all this who are saying, hey, look back this way. Mm-hmm. Don't keep doing what you're doing. Right. Don't keep following the ways that your ego is telling you to go.
Exactly.
But, even the whole thing you repent, the kingdom of heaven is at hand.
Yes.
What that means is turn around.
Exactly.
I mean, so make a transition. That's what the repent actually translates to.
That's why I said you need to be born again.
Right.
You need to stop, repent, turn around, and step out of this level of awareness. Start your ascension process.
Right.
Start to come out of the grave of your physicality, limitation, perception, and come back to underneath the grace of the Father.
Yeah.
And have life and life more abundantly. And that was the whole plan all along, that we were supposed to live in divinity. But we've turned this whole thing into a torture scenario, and there's thousands and thousands of people that just hate the word God because they think he's up there on a cloud somewhere just making their life all kinds of crazy.
Yeah.
And that's not the case. He's saying, I'm everywhere, only if you'll choose to perceive me, because I've built inside of you a spiritual channel. They call it the flesh and the spirit.
Right.
If you'll tune into that every day and start to grow that perception, you'll start to experience what I always intended for you to have in your life all the time, everywhere. And that's what Jesus was doing.
Yeah.
You're saying, of my own self, I can do nothing.
Right.
But yet he performed miracles across the board. Why? Because he was living in a state of truth that dissolves illusion.
Right, and woke him up to that true reality of the spiritual realm, spiritual reality. And that's really what all the mystics and all the mystical teachings are saying. They're saying, unite ourselves to God. That's like the only way out.
It is.
Unite yourselves to God. That's the only way we can understand that this world is not something which we should give much importance to.
Right.
Like we think it is, but that's even why Jesus said, store up your treasures in heaven. Where moth and rust can't, destroy it, or where people aren't going to come and steal it. The stuff here is temporal.
Totally.
It's not really of the highest value, and you're focused on the wrong level of reality. Again, going back to the Eastern traditions, it's like, look upon this as a movie. Be in it, play the part you need, because there's lessons here to learn, but strive for awakening yourself to that higher level of consciousness, that higher level that begins to see spirit in everything around it.
Right.
Because then, like you said, God's only perceived or God only is where he's perceived, I think you said.
Right.
And that's what they're saying you need to do, is wake up that level of consciousness, escape from the illusion, the dream world, this Maya that we're in.
The separation.
Yeah. The duality, and recognize who and what you truly are. Before the show, you mentioned, didn't Jesus say, ye are gods?
Yes.
And
one of those that always puzzled me. Why would they make such a statement that ye are gods? I think Marvel comic books all of a sudden, hey, we're gods? What are you talking about?
Yeah. But that's basically what he was trying to wake them up to.
Yes.
He said, you are gods, all of you, children of the Most High.
But not in the temporal human self-ego God.
Right.
You are not a God in that level of awareness and perception.
No, that's limited.
Yes.
You're limited in that form.
And this spiritual thing that I'm talking about is a power that the ego doesn't understand, because it can't be used. It's not self-serving.
Right.
And it's hard for you to wrap your mind around that.
Right. If you go back to the example I was giving before of when the Hindu said Brahman was this self-conscious, loving, and just want to share itself.
Yes.
That wasn't for a selfish reason. It just want to give of itself. And that's what they would say you need to start, trying to cultivate within yourself, is not a selfish form of love or a selfish nature or any of that. You need to be focused more on the bigger picture of the more selfless acts. And again, I think we've touched upon this in the show too. We're not saying we don't care about ourselves or respect ourselves,
right,
but we start thinking more of what's for the greater good rather than just me, I, and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, once you understand that the invisible is actually more important, the invisible energy is actually brought everything that you see into form, or what we would call concept. It's holding up the limited images that you perceive as the trees, the forest, the planet.
Right. Right.
He breathed his life into you. So all of us have this life in us.
Yeah.
It's just not awakened or fully realized.
Right.
And that's where we're the prodigal son. We're living, eating the husk and the dirt.
With the pigs and the mud.
But we have access to everything that the Father has, which is abundance through everything.
Yeah. But
yet we don't realize that. And ego keeps you bound by fear, beating you down and talking you out of it. And then we have social structures in place that reinforce the fact of guilting you into limitation and you're not enough and you will never measure up. And I'm sorry, that story has to go.
Right.
Because we are transforming and changing our level of awareness as a planet.
Yes.
And I think you can see the ripples that are happening throughout society.
Right.
Because of that.
Yeah, it's shaking things up. They say that, again, going to some of the Eastern perspectives, they say living in duality, one is ultimately asleep. And so what we need to do is when one emerges from the waking, into the waking state of God consciousness, that the dreamer wakes up from the dream and awakens to the true reality.
Yes.
And it's only by, and what they say is it's actually awakening out of the matter dream and into the spiritual realm.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah. That's what they're hoping to do. And they say the person that is able to do that is actually a superhuman. You know, it takes great strength to raise your consciousness, expand your consciousness into the infinite. And once you do that, they say you're then able to laugh at the play because you see in reality that it's really just all laughable because there's no harm that really comes. There's no real suffering to the true essence of who you are. There's no death to the true essence of who you are. And so all of that just sort of becomes comical.
I get it. I totally get it. The human side of you will never get it. It says that too in the scriptures.
Right.
That the spiritual things of God is foolishness unto man and always will be. You can't comprehend this within your human creature level of awareness ever.
No, absolutely. But I think we need to stop here. I enjoyed this conversation with you today. Thank you all for tuning in. Let us know what you think about our topic today, or how do you think, God sees the world? How do you see the world? We'd love to know your thoughts and comments, so please leave them below. Thank you all. We appreciate you all. We love you. Have a blessed and beautiful day.